A scruffy man with a thick beard, wearing a worn-out hoodie and thick glasses, stepped into a small diner in the heart of Willow Creek. No one looked twice. No one knew. He was the very man who built this place from the ground up. It only took a single sound, barely a whisper of a sob, muffled behind the swinging door to the kitchen, for him to rise abruptly from his seat, abandoning a half-eaten burger. And in that fleeting moment, everything changed, not just for him, but for an entire company. Why was a waitress crying during her shift? What truth was hidden behind her forced smile and routine, "Welcome in"? And how did a founder who once believed he was building a second home for others suddenly realize that the very system he created was quietly breaking the people he cared about most? This is the story of Ethan Cole, CEO of the Harvest Table diner chain with 14 locations. A man who once built his company on a simple philosophy: customers matter, but employees matter more. For years, Harvest Table had been praised as one of the friendliest workplaces in the region, a place where, supposedly, everyone felt like family. But then, everything began to spiral out of control. Complaints poured in. Staff started quitting one after another. Internal reports remained spotless, polished to perfection, yet they sharply contradicted the quiet murmurs from customers and former employees. Ethan felt like a stranger in the very company he had created, so he made a decision. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. No assistants, no cameras, no formal announcement. He left behind the crisp button-down shirts and boardroom briefings and walked alone into the most remote branch of his business, a place where no one would recognize him. Just a man with a worn hoodie and weary hope, searching for what had been lost. But what he found was far more than a hectic shift or a poorly managed team. What he discovered was a system quietly cracking from the inside. And perhaps the most heartbreaking truth of all, the only thing holding that place together, was a young woman named Ava, still smiling at customers, even as her hands trembled from exhaustion. He came there to investigate. What he didn't expect was to be changed by what he saw. But he walked out with a heavy heart and a silent promise echoing inside him. No one in this company will ever have to suffer in silence again. Ethan Cole was never the kind of businessman who graced the covers of flashy magazines. He didn't care for luxury cars or rising stock prices. The only thing that had kept him up at night for the past 10 years was figuring out how to preserve the warmth behind every Harvest Table location, a name that carried memories of childhood dinners in his grandmother's tiny kitchen, filled with the scent of fresh cornbread and the sound of laughter from a humble little diner in a struggling Nebraska neighborhood. Ethan had built a network of 14 branches across multiple states. No flashy ads, no gimmicks, just honest food, affordable prices, and friendly staff. He once told his management team, "We're not in the business of serving meals, we're in the business of serving kindness." But lately, the reports on his desk had gone cold, numbers that chilled his heart. Returning customer rates were plummeting. Employee turnover had hit an all-time high. Complaints about rude service, long wait times came flooding in, so much so that their customer feedback system had to be upgraded just to keep from crashing. "It's just a rough patch," the regional team insisted. Staffing shortages are happening everywhere in the industry. But Ethan wasn't convinced, because nearly every complaint he received came from the same type of location branches he hadn't visited in years, so he made a choice. He picked the one farthest from headquarters, Willow Creek, just a tiny, quiet town with scattered homes and empty roads. A branch that had opened with a heartfelt promise. A warm stop for every family traveling long roads. That morning, Ethan pulled on his old hoodie, wore thick-framed glasses, and let his beard grow in wild and untamed, making him look more like a man searching for a job than a multi-millionaire CEO walking into his own business. No film crew, no hidden cameras. Just him and a heart caught somewhere between hope and heartbreak. From the outside, the Willow Creek branch looked fine. The sign was a little faded, but still lit. Tables were wiped down. The signature harvest-themed painting still hung neatly on the walls. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't what he saw. It was what he felt. The air was heavy. Gone were the warm greetings, the familiar laughter that once filled this place like music. The soul of the diner felt missing. As he stepped inside, a young woman approached, holding a worn order pad. There was a tired smile tugging at her lips, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. A small name tag rested over her chest. Ava. "Hi there. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice hoarse like someone who had been speaking non-stop since sunrise. "Just coffee, please," Ethan replied, choosing a seat by the window. As Ava turned to walk away, Ethan's eyes followed quietly. She moved fast, efficient even, but there was a slight tilt in her posture, the unmistakable lean of someone who'd been on her feet for far too long. She was taking orders, pouring water, bussing tables alone, no backup, no helping hands. Just Ava, trying to hold up the entire shift by herself. And stranger still, the shift manager never once came out to greet a customer. Ethan had trained his managers with one guiding principle: customers matter, yes, but your staff, they are the soul of the store. Yet here, not a single leader appeared. Not a single word of support was spoken. And just as Ava disappeared through the swinging kitchen door, a man's voice thundered from inside Ava. "How many times you're slow again? If you can't keep up, then maybe it's time you quit." Ethan's brow furrowed. Never, not once, had he heard anyone in his organization speak to an employee like that. But still, he stayed seated. He didn't rush in. He didn't reveal who he was, because sometimes, to truly see what's broken, you have to let your heart go silent and just watch. Steam curled from the paper cup in his hands. The coffee sat untouched. Ethan simply observed. Ava darted between 3 tables and a cluttered beverage station like a whirlwind. Her movements fast but frantic, like someone racing an invisible clock. She smiled gently at an elderly guest, then sprinted into the kitchen to grab an order, only to burst back out moments later as if someone were timing her down to the second. And then, just then, a voice shot out from the kitchen, sharp as a knife. "Ava, what the hell is taking you so long? Customers are waiting, or do you just want to get fired already?" Ethan flinched. That wasn't just yelling. There was something else in it. Contempt. Control. The tone of someone far too comfortable wielding power like a weapon. He saw Ava freeze just for a second, Her shoulders sank. Her whole frame folded slightly, as if the weight of that voice had pressed straight into her spine. But then, like a machine long programmed to endure, she pressed her lips together, lowered her head, and walked silently back into the kitchen. Ethan stayed seated, his hands tightening around the coffee cup. He planned to wait until the food came out. He'd act like just another customer, play the part for a little longer. But then something shattered. Not a plate, not glass, but something far more fragile, like a string pulled too tight, finally snapping. It was a sound, faint at first, so quiet he thought he imagined it. But then it grew clearer, a stifled sob, a breath caught in the throat, a cry trying desperately not to be heard. Ava. Ethan set his coffee down, a sharp pain tugging at his chest. His footsteps were nearly silent as he moved toward the double swinging door to the kitchen. He pushed gently, and what he saw on the other side stopped him cold. Ava stood with her back to him, shoulders trembling violently. She wiped her tears quickly with the back of her hand, but the sound of her broken breath gave her away. Across from her stood a man in an apron, arms akimbo, face flushed with anger. The name tag on his chest read, "Derek, Shift Manager. I just need a minute," Ava pleaded, her voice cracking. "I haven't had a break since morning. I haven't even had water. If you can't handle it, then get out. I don't have time to babysit whining employees." Derek snapped. Two line cooks behind them kept their heads down. Pretending to be busy, no one dared to step in. Ethan's fists clenched. Blood surged to his temples. In that moment, he was no longer a customer, no longer an outsider. He was the founder of this place, a place never meant to bury human tears beneath the hiss of frying pans and the bark of power-drunk commands. Ethan pushed the door open gently and stepped into the kitchen. "What's going on in here?" His voice was calm, low and steady, but it cut through the room like a knife. Everything froze. Derek turned, startled to find a stranger standing just a few feet away. "It's nothing, just a little misunderstanding," he stammered. "Nothing serious." Ava looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." Ethan turned his gaze to her, soft, steady, then shifted to Derek, his tone now firm. "She needs a break, at least 5 minutes. We can't afford that." "We're short-staffed," Derek snapped back. "And clearly short on respect, too," Ethan said, his eyes unwavering. "You can't expect people to care for customers when they're being crushed from the inside." Derek narrowed his eyes. "Who are you to give orders around here?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply reached out and took the tray of water from Ava's trembling hands. Then he looked at her gently, with warmth, and said, "Take a break, Ava. I've got this." And for the first time, Ava looked at him not as a waitress looking at a customer, but as a human being. Seen. Truly seen. Ava quietly stepped out of the kitchen. She walked past Ethan without a word, just a slight nod of her head, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, eyes rimmed with red. Derek retreated to the back of the line, his face now marked with confusion. The aggression from earlier had faded, but not a trace of remorse followed in its place. Ethan said nothing more. He returned to his seat, lowering himself slowly into the booth. The burger on his table had long gone cold. He didn't touch it. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opening the Notes app and began typing with the precision of a man about to operate on a wound that had festered too long. Staffing severely understaffed. One server covering nearly 10 tables. Manager Derek hostile behavior, publicly berating staff. Denies breaks even water. Employee Ava, under immense pressure, still providing respectful, professional service. Each sentence he typed felt less like a business observation and more like a field report from a war zone. This wasn't operations management anymore. This was a rescue mission. A mission to save a workplace culture he had once poured his heart into. He kept watching. Because when you're trying to fix something that's broken, you first have to understand just how deep the cracks go. A few minutes later, Ava returned from her short break. Her steps were slower now. Her body clearly drained, but she did everything she could to appear composed. She still smiled at customers. She still apologized politely if a dish was delayed. And when she noticed a young mother struggling to calm a restless toddler, Ava quietly handed over a few crayons and a blank menu for the child to scribble on. Ethan made a quick note in his phone. Ava has exceptional customer care instincts. Even in exhaustion, she pays attention to the smallest needs. But while Ava worked to bring a sense of ease back to the dining room, Derek stood behind the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching her with the cold, scrutinizing gaze of a warden. No words of encouragement, no thanks, just sharp glares and audible sighs dripping with irritation. Ethan's brow furrowed. His eyes drifted toward the prep station where a young man was clumsily slicing onions, his movements hesitant but focused. The name tag on his chest read, Luis. Ethan watched as Luis stole glances toward Ava every so often, concern flickering in his eyes. And whenever Derek turned his back, Luis would quietly step in, helping Ava carry a tray, refilling a glass of water, small gestures almost invisible to others, but not to Ethan. Nothing about this day was invisible to him anymore. Luis' quiet support, strong team spirit, worth watching closely. Ethan typed the note slowly, because he knew in every system that's rotting from the inside, there are always a few people quietly holding it up. And it's those people, those quiet pillars of kindness, that become the soil where trust can be planted again. As the lunch rush tapered off and the diner began to quiet down, Ethan waved Ava over to settle the bill. She approached with a faint smile, her eyes sunken from fatigue. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I'm sorry if the food took a bit too long." Ethan looked at her for a moment, then gently tucked a wad of cash into the check sleeve, far more than the meal had cost. "No need to apologize. You did everything right." Ava blinked, as if she wasn't used to hearing praise, especially not from strangers. "Thank you," she whispered, then turned back to her duties, unaware that the man she had just served was someone who could change her life forever. Ethan walked toward the door, but before stepping out, he paused and turned around. One last look. Ava was pouring coffee for an elderly guest. her hand still trembling slightly. Luis, across the room, was being scolded by Derek for forgetting to clear a table after lunch. Same scene, same people. But Ethan now saw it all differently. Ethan pulled out his phone again. Call Janet assistant. Have her prepare the full HR file for the Willow Creek branch. Request an emergency meeting with the regional manager. He hit the dial button, and the moment the line picked up, he didn't waste a word. Janet, I'm coming back tomorrow, but this time, I'm not here to observe. I'm here to clean house. The next morning, the town of Willow Creek still lay tucked in a thin blanket of fog, its wooden porches and sleepy streets barely stirred by the dawn. The soft yellow glow of the harvest table sign glimmered through the haze, a warm invitation to anyone passing by. But today, Ethan didn't enter as a stranger. Same old hoodie, same unshaven beard, same thick-rimmed glasses. But in his coat pocket now was a small leather notebook and a resolve sharpened overnight. The diner was quieter than yesterday's lunch rush. A few regulars sat scattered sipping coffee, flipping through newspapers. Luis was in the back, prepping quietly, hands moving fast with practiced ease. But Ethan wasn't looking for Luis. His eyes settled on her, the young woman at the corner table, gently pouring coffee for a customer. Ava. She was still the first one to arrive, even though she'd barely been home for 10 hours. Her smile this morning was thinner, her eyes darker, and her walk a strange blend of exhaustion and muscle memory, the kind of movement you only learn when your body keeps going long after your spirit has left it behind. Ethan approached quietly. Ava. She looked up, slightly startled to see the same man from the day before. Hi. Are you here for breakfast? Actually, Ethan said gently, I was hoping to talk, just for a few minutes, if that's okay. His tone was soft, measured, careful not to sound like a demand. Ava glanced around. Only a few customers sat scattered across the room. The morning was still slow. She gave a small nod. Just a few minutes, though we're still short-staffed. They sat by the window. Morning light spilled sideways through the glass, casting a pale glow over the shadows beneath her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but this conversation was going to change everything. I saw how hard you were working yesterday, Ethan began softly. But I also got the feeling you're carrying too much on your shoulders. Ava stayed quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped tightly around the coffee mug in front of her. That's just part of the job, she said at last, her voice low. Everyone's tired. You get used to it. Ethan tilted his head, his voice steady but compassionate. Is there something here that doesn't feel right, the way things are run? Or maybe certain people? Ava glanced briefly toward the kitchen. Derek hadn't arrived yet. But even that one look said more than words ever could. I don't want to speak badly about anyone, she said, her eyes returning to the table. It's not fair to talk behind someone's back. It's not bad-mouthing, Ethan replied gently. It's telling the truth. She looked up at him, and for the first time since yesterday, there was a flicker of emotion behind her tired expression. Not fear, not fatigue, but anger. Not at him, but at the silence she'd had to live with for too long. Derek's not evil, she said slowly. But he shouldn't be a manager. He takes all his stress out on us. And we just take it. She took a deep breath. No support, no breaks, no thank yous, just yelling, blaming, and get out if you can't handle it. Ethan nodded slowly, taking it all in, each word like a weight landing gently but heavily on the table. "What about Luis?" he asked. "I noticed he seemed to look out for you." A flicker of softness crossed Ava's face like a single candle flickering in a dark room. "Luis," she echoed. "He's only been here a few months, but honestly, if it weren't for him, I probably would have quit by now." She gave a small, tired smile. "He doesn't say much, but he always steps in at the right time, and he's never made me feel less." There was something in her voice, a quiet ache, the ache of someone who had grown so used to being invisible that even the smallest kindness felt like a reason to stay. Before Ethan could ask more, the kitchen door swung open. Derek stepped out, apron already tied, his eyes sweeping the room like a radar. In an instant, Ava's shoulders tensed, her eyes dropped to the floor. It was like watching a light go dim, a switch being flipped. She stood up quickly. "I'm sorry, I have to get back to work." Ethan didn't stop her. He simply watched as she walked away. And in his mind, the pieces began to click into place. One by one, the links reconnected. A larger picture, one he had been too far away to see, was now coming into focus. And now, he knew with absolute certainty he couldn't leave this place without doing something. About 15 minutes later, the midday rush began to trickle in. Drivers passing through town, just like they did every day at this hour, started filling up the booths and bar stools. Harvest Table had always been a trusted stop, not because of flashy menus, but because of the genuine warmth that once came with every plate of pancakes. But today, Ethan sat in the corner with his notebook in hand, eyes scanning the room, and what he saw made his heart tighten, beat after heavy beat. Ava was darting between tables again, still the only one working the floor. Luis tried to help quietly, bussing dishes when he could, but every time he lingered too long outside the kitchen, his eyes would dart nervously back to where Derek stood. The manager wasn't lifting a finger. No refills, no table touches, no support. Just commands, just criticism, just control. An elderly man in a worn flannel shirt raised his hand toward Ava. "Miss, my eggs are overcooked again," he called, voice slightly raised. Ethan looked over and something inside him snapped. Ava rushed over to the elderly man's table. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I'll take this back and have a new plate made right away." But the man wasn't done. "Come on now, just do it right the first time. Now I've got to sit here and wait again." Ava bit her lip and lowered her head. "I understand. I'm really sorry. I'll take care of it right away." And in that exact moment, Derek stormed out of the kitchen, his face flushed with rage. "You again. How many times have I told you to check the orders before bringing them out?" The room froze. Silverware clinked softly against plates, then silence. Ava stood still, her head bowed, absorbing every word like a blow. She didn't fight back, didn't flinch, just stood there, Ethan didn't move either, but his gaze shifted from Ava, silent and spent, to Derek, whose words cracked like a whip across someone already running on empty. And then, "That's enough." Ethan's voice rang out, cutting clean through the tension in the air. Derek spun around. "Who the hell are you to interfere with my shift?" Ethan stood slowly, no longer writing, no longer watching. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulled out his wallet and flipped it open to reveal a sleek ID card, embossed with the company logo. Harvest Table, Ethan Cole, founder and CEO. The room gasped. Even Ava's breath caught in her throat. Ethan spoke slowly, but every word landed like stone on marble. "I'm the founder of this restaurant chain. All 14 locations, including this one." The entire dining room held its breath. Ava stood frozen, her lips slightly parted in disbelief. Luis peeked out from the kitchen, eyes wide as saucers. Someone dropped a spoon into a glass of water. No one moved. No one spoke. Except for Derek, whose breathing grew short, his face now a confusing mix of flushed red and pale panic. "I came here as a customer," Ethan continued, his voice calm but razor-sharp, "because I needed to understand why my company was falling apart. Now I know." Derek stammered, I didn't know who you were. I wasn't trying to. It's just no excuses." Ethan took a single step forward, his voice lowering like distant thunder. "I saw it. I heard it. I documented everything. Your staff is being yelled at, overworked and disrespected, and all you do is stand back, bark orders, and shift blame instead of leading." A beat of silence. "Office? Now." Derek swallowed hard, lips pressed into a line. He didn't argue. He didn't even look back. He turned and walked off toward the back, quiet, humiliated. Ethan turned to Ava, his tone softening like the breaking of dawn. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Everything changes, starting today." Then Ethan turned and walked calmly toward the back, following Derek into the office. No one said a word, but in every pair of eyes, from Ava to Luis to the customers who had witnessed the entire moment, something had shifted. For the first time, justice had stepped into this diner. The office door clicked shut behind them. The noise of clinking plates and casual chatter outside faded into a distant hum, as if the room itself had closed off the world to make space for one thing, only truth. Ethan stood tall, shoulders square, his eyes locked onto Derek, who now looked smaller than ever. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the voice that had once barked commands and crushed morale. Now, he was just a man trembling with the weight of knowing he was about to face consequences. Derek tried to speak first, voice faltering. I know I can be a little harsh, but it's the pressure. Man, we're always short. Every shift. If I don't crack down, the whole place falls apart." Ethan raised his hand firm, steady, and cut him off. "You think I've never worked a kitchen line? Derek, I used to pull 12-hour shifts back when I opened the first store. I know pressure, but not once did I ever scream at my staff like they were machines meant to run until they broke." Derek lowered his head, lips pressed tight. Ethan stepped closer, his voice still low but now edged with restrained fury. "You know what, Derek? I didn't build Harvest Table to become some money-churning chain powered by human exhaustion. Every single location was opened with one goal in mind: to be a place where customers felt cared for and where the people serving them were treated with respect. He took a slow breath. But yesterday, I walked into my own restaurant and saw a young woman, Ava, crying in the back kitchen because she hadn't had a sip of water after 6 straight hours on her feet. And you stood there in front of a dining room full of people and humiliated her as if kindness was some kind of luxury. Derek mumbled, barely audible. I was wrong. I know that. I can do better. I'll change how I talk to people. No, Ethan interrupted, his gaze unshaken. You won't have that chance here anymore. Derek froze. You mean you're firing me? Not thinking about it, Ethan said firmly, his words dropping like hammers in the stillness of the room. It's already decided. Each syllable landed with quiet finality, pinning the moment in place. HR will handle the paperwork and your final paycheck. But as of right now, you are no longer the manager of the Willow Creek branch. There was no outburst, no defense, just silence. And in Derek's eyes, a quiet unraveling. The slow collapse of a man who once believed his authority made him untouchable. He lowered his head, his hands tightening around the straps of his apron, then turned without a word and walked out of the office. Not as a manager, not even as a leader. Just a man who had lost not only his title, but the dignity that came with it. The office door clicked shut behind him once more. Ethan stood alone, both hands resting on the edge of the desk. His shoulders rose and fell with a heavy breath, as a quiet wave of emotion pressed in from beneath the surface. He never liked firing people. Each time he did it, some part of him broke a little too. But this time he knew it was right. Because keeping someone like Derek would mean betraying the very philosophy this company was built on. Kindness is not optional, it's the foundation. When Ethan stepped out of the office, every eye in the restaurant turned to him. Ava stood near the counter, still holding a half-full coffee pot mid-air. Luis peeked out from the kitchen doorway, a smear of pancake batter on his glove. Several customers rose halfway from their seats, unsure if they should stay or leave. The air was thick, silent, like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Ethan didn't stand behind the counter. He didn't posture like a CEO descending from a corporate tower. Instead, he stepped calmly into the center of the dining room, removed his glasses, and looked at every person, staff and customer alike, with eyes full of honesty and humility. He drew in a deep breath, then spoke. "I'm sorry." A simple sentence, but the entire room went still. Ethan continued, voice steady, open. "I'm sorry for being away too long, for letting this place become one where employees' voices were ignored, and for believing pretty reports instead of listening to the people who keep this place running day after day." He turned toward Ava and Luis, his gaze soft but resolute. "But today is a new beginning. Everything changes starting here." He walked slowly to the counter, placing his hand gently on its worn wooden surface, the same counter thousands had leaned on before. "Derek will no longer be working here. And let me make this clear, no one has the right to demean you or drain your spirit in the name of profit." A small exhale came from somewhere in the room. Luis blinked, eyebrows lifted in quiet disbelief. Ava looked like her knees might give out, one hand reaching instinctively for the counter to steady herself. Ethan took a slow look around the room at every tired face, every wary expression. He didn't see confidence yet, but he saw something else beginning to flicker behind their eyes. Hope, or maybe just the stunned silence of being seen. "Ava, Luis," Ethan said, turning to them. "When your shift ends, meet me at the counter. We need to talk." Ava nodded, slowly. Her eyes were glassy, on the verge of tears, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion or frustration or defeat. This time it was because someone had finally looked her in the eye and told her without a doubt, "You matter." Ethan then turned to the guests seated throughout the restaurant, offering a humble bow of his head. "Thank you for your patience today. If anything felt unusual, it's because this is why I came here. And I promise if you come back tomorrow, you'll see a different harvest table." A few customers began to clap softly at first, then building in quiet solidarity. One older gentleman stood up, smiled warmly, and said, "Son." The elderly man said, smiling as he placed his hat back on, "I used to think you were just another grumpy old guy. But today, I see it. You're a good man dressed in humble clothes." Ethan let out a soft laugh, touched and sincere. He clasped his hands together and gave a small bow. "I'm just a man trying to find the soul of the company I built, and today I found it in the eyes of the people who work right here." Something shifted in the room. It wasn't the lighting. It wasn't the sound. It was the feeling. The diner, just minutes ago tight with tension, was now filled with something gentler, lighter, real. Not just from the food on the table, but from things that could never be printed on a menu, being heard, being seen, being part of something that was finally changing. Outside, the sun had begun its descent. Golden light poured through the short curtains, leaving soft streaks of yellow across the worn wooden floor. One by one, the last few customers left, and Ethan personally walked them to the door, thanking each with a warmth that didn't feel corporate, but human. Behind him, Ava stood at the counter, coffee pot empty in her hand, her gaze fixed on the door Ethan had just closed. Luis, still in the kitchen, slowed his pace, almost unwilling to miss what was about to unfold. Because for the first time, they weren't just finishing a shift. They were standing at the edge of something new. Ethan returned quietly, removed his glasses, and took a seat at a table near the back, the same table where it all began for him just days ago. He lifted a hand and gave a gentle wave. "Ava, Luis, would you come sit with me for a moment?" The two exchanged a glance, then slowly made their way over. Ava set the empty coffee pot on the counter, her fingers instinctively twisting the corner of her apron. Luis kept his hands in his pockets, his posture slightly hesitant, not from fear, but from not knowing what to expect. They sat across from Ethan at the quietest table in the restaurant, the same spot where he had once sat as a stranger. Now, he was here as something else. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice warm, his eyes soft. "First of all," he said, I want to thank both of you. Ava blinked. Luis stilled. Thank you for not giving up, for choosing to stay even when staying meant carrying more than you should have. And thank you for holding on to the one thing this company was built on: kindness. Ava bit her lip, eyes starting to shine again. Luis looked down at the table, lips pressed tight. Ethan went on, slower now, more vulnerable. I'll be honest. I lost touch with reality. I only saw numbers, graphs. I convinced myself that if the revenue was steady, everything must be fine. He paused, his voice softening even more. But yesterday, Ethan continued, when I heard Ava crying in the kitchen, it hit me. A company can still look profitable on paper, but be losing its soul every day if the real people behind it are falling apart in silence. Ava spoke up softly, as if afraid to interrupt something sacred. It's not always bad. Sometimes we just wish someone would really notice. Ethan nodded slowly. Now someone does. He turned to Luis. Luis, I've been watching you these past few days. You don't speak loudly. You don't look for credit. But somehow, you're always there at the right moment. You've been quietly backing up your team without ever asking for thanks. That kind of loyalty that comes from character, you can't train that. That's just who you are. Luis blinked, unsure if he heard right. I want you to step into the role of assistant manager. We'll get you formal training, a raise, and if things go well over the next 3 months, you'll be in line for something bigger. I've never managed anyone before. Luis stammered. Ethan smiled gently. You already have. You just didn't call it that yet. Then he turned to Ava. And you? Ava lifted her eyes, her lips trembling slightly. I know you don't need praise. You've gotten used to carrying the weight alone. But I can't let that continue. Ethan's voice softened as he leaned forward. Starting next week, I'm increasing your pay. And I'm working on a new reward system so that people like you, who give everything from the heart, are always seen. Ava raised her hand to her mouth, her voice catching in her throat. I don't know what to say. I just thought I was doing what I was supposed to. Ethan's gaze softened, his words slow but firm. No, Ava, you're doing more than that. You're doing things that can't be taught, like handing crayons to a child so their mother can breathe for a minute. You care for customers, even when you're hurting yourself. That's not a job. That's character. The three of them sat in silence for a moment. No more words were needed. In that quiet space, perhaps for the first time in months, the Harvest Table restaurant truly felt peaceful. Ethan broke the silence, his voice steady and resolute. Starting tomorrow, we're going to begin again, not just as a restaurant, but as a workplace that truly deserves respect, a real family. Ava nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Luis clenched his fist on his lap, not to appear strong, but as a silent promise he would not betray this trust. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind, not of chaos, but of change in motion. Ethan didn't leave Willow Creek as planned. Instead, he moved into a small inn near the diner, bringing along his laptop and a thick notebook filled with notes. He was there every day, from the crack of dawn. Not to supervise, but to work alongside the staff, wiping tables, bussing dishes, peeling potatoes, even scrubbing plates during peak hours. Customers began to recognize the scruffy man from the day before as the CEO, and instead of feeling distant, they saw him as just another person, always ready to roll up his sleeves and serve, just like everyone else. His presence was the clear message. Change doesn't just live on paper, it's in every single action. Exactly 1 week later, Ethan held a small interview session at the diner, not in a fancy office, but right at the same table where Ava had once cried. He personally interviewed candidates for the new management position. After several rounds of interviews, Ethan selected a woman named Donna Harper, a former restaurant manager with 20 years of experience and a rare, soft heart in an industry known for its hardness. On her very first day, Donna walked into the kitchen, took a look around, and said to the team, "I'm not here to supervise you. I'm here to support you. If anyone's tired, let me know. If anyone needs a break, I'll cover for you. We're not just working together. We're building a place we all want to come back to every day." Louis nodded, a quiet understanding in his eyes. Ava almost burst into tears, and Ethan, standing behind the counter, simply smiled, writing down one more line in his notebook. Kindness, no matter the role, is always the first step to rebirth. Along with hiring a new manager, Ethan implemented a series of changes. He brought in 3 new employees to lighten the load on Ava and Louis. Ethan made further improvements. He updated the kitchen equipment, replacing old machines with energy-efficient models that ran faster, and he revamped the work schedule, ensuring that no one worked more than 6 hours straight without a break. He launched the trust-based rewards program, allowing customers to nominate staff members they wanted to thank directly. The employee with the most nominations each month would receive a special reward from the company. The results came quickly. Customer traffic increased. On local social media, a post titled "CEO serves as a waiter" changes the soul of the diner spread like wildfire. Harvest Table, Willow Creek, was no longer the branch full of complaints. It had become a model of company culture reform within the entire chain. One afternoon, as Ethan was preparing to leave the diner and head back to headquarters after nearly 2 weeks of living on the ground, Ava approached him at the door, stopping him in his tracks. "I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for coming back." Ethan stopped in his tracks, looking at the young woman before him. Her demeanor was brighter now, her eyes more confident than before. "Thank you. Thank you for not walking away when everything was still so hard." Ava smiled. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but at least today, I believe I deserve to be here." Ethan nodded, his voice gentle yet full of conviction. "And I promise you, starting today, I will never let anyone carry the weight alone again." The weeks that followed unfolded like a quiet miracle, not because of a famous person's visit or a grand marketing campaign, but because of the small things done right, the ones that mattered most. Mornings at the Willow Creek branch were no longer filled with grumbled complaints. Instead, they echoed with warm greetings between shifts. Ava no longer had to shoulder it all alone. 3 new employees, a part-time college student, a single mother, and a fresh graduate were trained properly, nurtured and cared for by Donna, as if they were family. Luis donned the assistant manager shirt for the first time in his life. He still felt a bit uneasy when others called him boss, but he was always the last one to leave the kitchen each day, making sure everything was checked thoroughly for the next. The kitchen, once filled with tension, now played soft music from a small speaker by the sink. Donna had put up a compliments of the day board on the wall where customers could leave thank you notes on sticky paper, and it was always full just hours later. Ava, on the other hand, had transformed completely. She still had her small frame, but her eyes were no longer lost. She didn't come to work just to get through the day. She came because she felt she belonged there now. Her smile, when handing the menu to customers, had returned, and this time it wasn't forced. It came from a place of genuine belief. One day, a mother who had visited the diner when her child was crying, the same woman who had received the crayons from Ava the first day Ethan came, returned with a handwritten card. "Thank you to the girl who made me feel understood, more than 1,000 words ever could." Ethan still visited several times a week. No disguises, no hiding. He walked into the diner like a familiar face, getting coffee from Ava, shaking hands with Luis, and chatting with Donna about staff schedules and employee benefits. For Ethan, this wasn't just a branch that had been fixed. It was a living reminder that a company doesn't fall apart because of a lack of sales, but because it loses its reason to exist. The sales at the Willow Creek branch increased by 22% in the first month after the changes. But Ethan didn't care much about the numbers. What made him more proud than anything else was the grateful look on his staff's faces at the end of their shifts, the sincere thank yous from customers, and the fact that no one had to work while swallowing their tears anymore. One late afternoon, as Ethan prepared to leave and head back to headquarters, Ava ran out to the door, holding a small box in her hands. Ethan turned to face her. "I'm not great at saying the right words, so I'm giving you this." Inside the box was a wooden spoon, engraved with a handwritten message, for the man who didn't just serve food, but served justice. Ethan smiled, but said nothing. Instead, he gave her a light hug, then softly replied, "Thank you, Ava, and promise me, if this diner ever forgets its reason for existing, you'll be the first to speak up." Ava nodded, her voice firm. "I'll be the one to remind you." A few weeks later, Ethan returned to the corporate office of Harvest Table. But this time, he didn't come back as a CEO reclaiming his seat of power. He came back as someone who had rediscovered the most important thing he had ever lost. He called a nationwide meeting with all the regional managers, not via Zoom, not by email, but in person, on the screen, instead of presenting numbers. He showed a short clip, Ava laughing as she poured coffee, Luis teaching a new employee how to wipe a table properly, Donna and the entire team sharing a piece of cake gifted by a customer. When the video ended, Ethan stood silently for a moment. Then he said only one sentence: "We don't run a restaurant. We build a refuge for those who need a little kindness in a world that's too cold." The story at Willow Creek didn't end there. It became a starting point, a shining example within the company of how to restore company culture. Other branches began sending in improvement suggestions, initiated by the staff themselves. A silent feedback box was placed in all 14 branches, where any employee could offer anonymous suggestions, and Ethan promised he would personally read every single one. For Ava, working as a server no longer felt like a burden, it was a source of pride. She stood behind the counter with a real smile, knowing that behind her was a team that had her back, and in front of her were customers who deserved kindness. Luis, the shy guy who once hid in the back, now had a voice. He was trusted, respected, and led by example. And on Donna's shirt, there was a small pin that read, "Led with compassion." Willow Creek, the once small town that seemed forgotten, had now become the beating heart of the entire system. Ethan once thought success was about expanding branches, increasing revenue every quarter, and landing on the cover of industry magazines. But after those quiet days spent sitting in the corner of that old diner, he came to realize you can't build a lasting empire if its foundation is silence, exhaustion, and neglect. Ava's story wasn't unique. Out there, beyond the walls of this diner, there were hundreds, maybe even thousands of people like her, quiet, dedicated, worn out, but never fully giving up on the belief that if someone truly cared, everything could change. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who listens, one person brave enough to step into the back and say, "I see you." And in that moment, it's enough to pull them from the darkness. No one is born to be invisible. And no one should have to work as if their worth is measured solely by the number of orders they complete each hour. Maybe you've been an Ava carrying the weight, tired, but still trying to smile because there's no other choice. Or maybe you're a Luis, quiet, always in the background, but showing up because you know someone else needs you. Or perhaps you're an Ethan, once thinking everything was fine, until you saw with your own eyes what was breaking from the inside. No matter who you are, remember, this kindness isn't a skill. It's a soft power, one that can turn an entire system around. And listening sometimes is the bravest act a leader can take. If this story resonates with you, share it. Not to get more views, but to give someone out there who's suffering in silence another reason to believe they are not alone, and they deserve to be seen.